If Russia conquered all of Ukraine, history wouldn't stop there. It would repeat itself in ways we've seen before. Occupation does not end wars. It creates new ones, usually. That's what history has shown us. And when one country swallows another, the world doesn't get peace. It usually gets second and third order effects that'll last for generations. I am Mandatory Fun Day, and this is what the aftermath of a successful Russian invasion looks like. At the end of this video, I'm going to be reading some of your favorite comments. My favorite comments. I don't know what your favorite comments are. I'm going to be reading my favorite comments from previous videos. The first thing Russia would do is likely consolidate power as soon as they are complete in their invasion of Ukraine and they have determined that the invasion was successful. They would probably install a pro-Moscow puppet modeled on Soviet satellite states. A few, pretty good ones come to mind. The next thing you could expect is forced Russification. Russification? I just made up a word. They would likely ban the Ukrainian language education, they would rewrite history in schools, and they would replace media with Kremlin propaganda. Russia is massive on propaganda. They always have been, and not what British people do when they took a good long look at something, a propaganda like misinformation. There would be mass arrests of Ukrainian officials, journalists, and activists. This would probably mirror the Soviet NKVD purges in the Baltics during the 1940s. This is very, very typical Russian behavior. They're exceptionally good at suppressing anything that they want to, really, and they're very aggressive in their tactics. History has shown us that occupation generally starts with erasing identity. Nazi Germany tried in Poland, the Soviets in the Baltic states, and Russia in Chechnya. Russia's playbook, in my opinion, is clear. They want to change the culture to erase any form of resistance. However, we've already seen the effects of this kind of stuff. In Afghanistan under the Soviets, enforced identity really didn't last. It only fueled massive rebellion. Do you think Russia could really erase Ukrainian identity, or would it backfire like it did in Afghanistan? Next up, there would be a significant refugee situation, and it would likely involve massive deportations. Millions of Ukrainians would flee west. This would cause the largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. Stalin deported entire populations, like those in Crimea in 1944. Russia could repeat this, relocating Ukrainians to Siberia or the Far East. Now, Russia may resettle ethnic Russians in Ukrainian cities to shift demographics. It has actually already done that in cities in Crimea. Western Europe, as a result of this, would face a massive strain on housing, its economies, politics. There would be some significant tension, significant friction with this influx of new people with a new culture. We already saw this with the Syrian refugees and how they impacted EU politics after 2015. People got to go somewhere, and anytime you mesh two cultures like that in such a significant, massive way, there's friction. Forced migration has always been a weapon. It's been used by empires from the Ottomans to the Soviets. A humanitarian crisis is not the only thing Europe would face, but political instability. There would be far-right political movements, and they would likely play up the refugee waves and any problems that arise from them. Russia would not just want to win territory. It would want to destabilize NATO countries, and it would want to do so without having to fire a shot. It's far less expensive to destabilize a country without a military presence. Now, do you think Europe would accept millions of Ukrainian refugees long-term, or would political backlash tear the EU apart? The video is not over, but I want to tell you about the mandatoryfunday.com. That's where I've got all my merchandise. I've also got exclusive content over there for members, and members get 20% off all merchandise purchases. In addition, we've got a link on the website that will take you to a place where you can buy regulation compliant shirts, but let's get back to the video. Ukraine would likely be militarized. Russia would fortify Ukraine with military bases, Black Sea naval hubs, and missile systems. I believe that the occupied territory would mirror how the USSR turned Eastern Europe into a buffer zone. NATO would face a new Iron Curtain stretching from the Baltics to the Black Sea. With Ukraine conquered, Russia could shift elite units toward Poland, Romania, and the Baltics. Now, the Warsaw Pact was created exactly this way, conquered or controlled territory becoming launching pads against NATO. Militarized Ukraine would force NATO to triple defense spending along the eastern flank, triple at least. We've seen throughout history what long, protracted, and expensive wars do. People are usually supportive of military conflicts at the beginning. You're always going to have the people that are anti-conflict no matter what. But long term, the populations of nations usually are not interested in continuing to pay for expensive expensive military conflicts. Russia would try and sell a narrative. They want their people to believe that NATO fears them, and in doing so, they would restore Soviet-style prestige. Do you think that NATO would escalate troop deployments because of this, or would they rely on nuclear deterrence like during the Cold War? Moldova is the weakest neighbor, and so Russia would likely move to connect Transnistria with occupied Ukraine. Russian minorities in countries like Estonia or Latvia could be used for a type of hybrid war, much like Mustache Man justified the invasion of Czechoslovakia by protecting Germans. Kaliningrad, Belarus, and Ukraine together would form a massive pressure triangle against NATO's Eastern Front. NATO's Article 5 would be tested immediately if Russia tried even hybrid tactics in the Baltics. Article 5 is an attack on one is an attack on all. That's kind of a summary of it. And yeah, if this were to happen, we'd have to fire up that Article 5. Not to be confused with an Article 15, which is what you got after you punched your lieutenant. Please don't punch me. History has shown us that aggressors don't stop. Mustache Man didn't stop at Austria. Saddam didn't stop at Kuwait. Russia's appetite for buffer zones means Moldova and the Baltics would feel immediate heat. Another interesting concept or idea to play around with is the idea of NATO's credibility and how it would likely hinge on how far they're willing to go to defend these small frontline states. If Russia did test NATO with hybrid tactics in the Baltics, do you think the alliance would actually go to war? A lot of people don't know, but Ukraine is one of the world's largest grain exporters. A successful invasion by Russia would mean Russia controls that market. Energy corridors in Ukraine would also be entirely in Moscow's hands, and energy is everything. During World War II, Hitler's invasion of Ukraine was partly to capture the breadbasket of Europe. That logic hasn't changed. Ukraine is still very, very integral in food production. As a result of this, food prices worldwide would skyrocket. It would hit Africa and the Middle East the absolute hardest. Control of food has always meant power for nations. Britain's naval blockades, US sanctions, Soviet grain exports to leverage influence. Russia would use Ukraine's resources as an economic weapon, rewarding allies and punishing critics. They would use this to further control the narrative. The global South nations might lean closer to Moscow for survival, breaking Western sanction unity. There would naturally be insurgencies and resistance. History shows us that occupation breeds insurgency. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. Ukraine already has partisan groups fighting behind Russian lines. This would multiply across the country. Russia would face endless sabotage, assassinations, and underground networks. The US and NATO could arm resistance forces, similar to the Mujahideen in the 1980s. But even if Russia won, it would inherit a bleeding wound. The longer the insurgency lasts, the more Russia drains its military and economy. Empires don't collapse from outside forces. They generally collapse from internal overreach. Would Ukraine turn into another Afghanistan for Russia, or could Moscow hold it through sheer brutality? I don't know. What do you think? Russia would have some significant internal strains after this. Maintaining control over hostile Ukraine would cost billions annually. Soviet Union collapsed partly due to the cost of Afghanistan. Ukraine could be even worse. Russian citizens already face sanctions, inflation, and isolation. And victory abroad doesn't erase instability at home. Look at what happened with the US in Vietnam. It weakened trust in the government. Vladimir Putin would present conquest as his crowning achievement, but cracks at home would widen. Russia holds a rebellious Ukraine, the weaker its own foundations become. Occupation victories often contain the seeds of long-term defeat. Do you think Russia could survive long-term occupation, or would it eventually collapse under the weight? You guys ready for some comments? Daniel's Politics 1. RuneScape player detected. I did play RuneScape. Those were the good old days. Bot or not, Germany is like, we're only stocking up to support Ukraine, we swear. I see you, Germany. I love that eye emoji. That's my favorite one, I swear. Don't listen to all the pacing grief. My ADHD loves how fast you talk. You be you. Thank you. I like talking fast. Send it, brother. Dang, the editing on this video is chef's kiss. Funny enough, that is actually my editor. Hey, Steve. Levi Markin said, I normally have to miss this because I'm at the chiropractor. I'm glad you didn't this time, Levi. And we'll try and shoot for a launch time of this time every time so that you can see it and still get your chiropractic care. Thank you guys so much for supporting me. I really, really appreciate it, and I will see you next time. Also, make sure you watch one of my other videos on geopolitics, because it's fun. I yell at the camera in every single one of them.